Gentlemen, thanks for joining us here on Future Net Zero. Andy, can you tell us a little bit about VIDA itself? What does VIDA do?
Yeah, sure. Very simply, VIDA is a global recruiter within the medtech and biotech sector. So we support businesses that have supply a medical device or biotechnology into the global healthcare market, and we source their key staff for them from when they're a startup through to when they're an established business. So we work with a lot of US clients who have bases in Germany and Asia Pacific, and we often run recruitment processes that will move people around globally for the right positions.
Do you have an office? I mean, I assume it's an office-based kind of organisation for our viewers and listeners to understand.
In the last 2 years, we've reduced our office size. So we had an office for 20 people. Over COVID, we split the business in two. We operate from a really nice office in a place called Beaucliffe Hall, which is an old estate just outside of Leeds. We're also linked to another business called Matt Burton Associates. They have two offices, one in Manchester and one in Chester. And then we have a number of remote people in the UK. So we have a couple of people down in the south of England, but we don't have a London office.
So I assume that you're like, millions of business up and down the country. When you look at an office business, you kind of think, well, there's not really much carbon there, do you? You kind of think carbon's something that, a big manufacturer would have. Why did you want to look into your carbon in the first place?
It's probably driven by our clients. When we're often asked to tender for major pieces of recruitment, we're asked quite in-depth questions about our business and our approach. A couple of the big questions that have come up in the last 2 years, one's been around diversity and inclusion, which is it's been a big agenda within all businesses. But the second one that's become more prevalent is around sustainability and what's our policies. And it was actually last November, it was actually the Matt Burton Associates business were talking to an organisation, and there was just a significant amount of questions asked around our approach. And actually we sat down as a board and said, we don't have one. And actually this is becoming quite a key thing within our industries. We work and support businesses that change people's lives. So therefore, we kind of had an internal look into our own business and said, actually, what can we do? What are we doing? And actually, do we understand it? And I think very quickly we came to the conclusion that we weren't a manufacturing business, and therefore it shouldn't take too much for us to make an impact, both culturally and from our carbon imprint. But actually, we just didn't understand it enough to understand how we would go about that. I then posted quite a bold statement around becoming carbon neutral on LinkedIn, and that was our intent. And it wasn't exactly what we were, but we had an intention to be. And really just appealing to my network for assistance and support, because as much as I could have done my desk research, actually I needed the advice of a bit more of a professional to guide me on that journey, which has been really eye-opening, and it's really transformed our thinking around not only our existing business but our solution that we provide to our global clients, which is quite an interesting kind of follow-on from being carbon neutral.
Yeah, and that expert, we can call him that, is James. So you lucky man, I should say. Yes, obviously. So James, tell me how you got involved and what you did first to just advise Andy on what was happening.
Well, like Andy mentioned, he put out quite a bold statement via his network looking for support and guidance. And it was a really interesting statement, actually, that grabbed me. It wasn't one that was just, we want to tick a box and we want to offset our carbon. It was one that was really well thought through and that wanted to make a difference to, like he said, both his organisation, but more widely to their customers as well. So I reached out, got into contact with Andy, and from there we sort of sat down, met, really got to understand VIDA, their history, their background and their client base and where they're wanting to go, and quickly put together a strategy that tackled VIDA's understanding of what their carbon footprint is. And like the intro, they've got offices, serviced offices. Their main footprint is through business travel, whether that be themselves traveling for business purposes or through the impact of the recruitment process through placing global candidates in the US, Europe, etc. So we've we've looked at VIDA as an entity, and we've gone through the Future Net Zero program. We've created their benchmark, and they've quickly adapted and made some good changes to the business to reduce their own carbon in the first instance.
Brilliant. And you know, the whole sort of standard, the Future Net Zero standard solution is three parts, Andy. It's that carbon accounting with Carbon Expert, it's our accreditation and benchmark, and then it's the ongoing work you're doing with James. If I just take you through the three parts, just to explain how easy they were and what significance, the accounting part and then the accreditation part. How did you find them, and what did you think once you'd got the figures and then a benchmark?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I had no preconception around what our figures would be. I had no idea what the impact would be, whether that would be.
Neither did we when we did it.
And that was the learning curve I was about to go on, because it was just looking at kind of where that footprint came from and what we could do about it. I think the biggest thing I learned very quickly was around that cultural and mindset shift around how we would make those changes and feeding that into the business. Just even small changes of how we were buying things, how we were talking to our landlord around, you know, the power that we use on site, and then we made a shift to electric vehicles. So the calculation and the understanding of that, it was very straightforward, but it was a real eye opener for me in terms of actually what that would mean. You know, obviously as a relatively small office-based business, I didn't anticipate it to be significant, but it was probably bigger than I would have put a number on. So that element was very straightforward. You know, working through with James, it became very clear what we needed to do there.
And then getting benchmarked. I mean, the whole idea of our accreditation process, it allows businesses to start, because you can't do anything till you know. But it also will help, hopefully, with an index in the future where you can compare yourself to other businesses. Do you find it a good idea to get benchmarked?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was probably really important versus last year, because 2020 was just a very rare year, hopefully, for us, that, you know, there was a huge shift in terms of our working practice. So, you know, there was we went from being 20 people in office to being 9 people working from home. So there was a definite change, just, you know, forced on us from the pandemic. But yeah, looking back at 2000, you know, we had to start somewhere. So 2019 was the obvious year to start from, and then moving to 2020. And then as we're going back into probably a little bit more of a standard working practice with office-based working and more travel, it'll be interesting to see how that changes again in 2021. So yeah, it was good to get a gauge of 2019 and then roll that into 2020. And yeah, again, it was all relatively straightforward. You know, we're not a significant business. It was relatively easy for us to track and calculate what we've done in terms of commuting and office-based working and home-based working, as well as business travel. All of those things we monitor, which is really good for this.
And of course, James is a genius, so he's helping you along with that advice. And James, in all seriousness, that constant conversation you're having with Andy, you know, you've done the accounting, you've done the benchmarking. What are you doing now to try and help his business and advise him in how to progress as the years go by?
Well, I mean, what the benchmarking allows us to do, aside to getting to know Andy, VIDA, the business, etc., it allows us to shape policy. Andy's mentioned diversity and inclusion, and that's something that they've done and that is quite rife in the recruitment agency business. Sustainability and environmental policy is not, and actually until you've got the data that the benchmark allows us to create, it's difficult to shape policy that then affects how you look forward as a business. And that's kind of where we're at now. We've got the data, we understand what the hotspots are, and we're now able to shape policy with VIDA, looking forward to enable them to reduce their carbon emissions over the short, medium and long term. But also, very importantly, and like Andy touched upon, it's about bedding that policy within the culture of the organisation so it stands the test of time and becomes a really powerful document to build from.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. It's something that we're asked for, and like any business that's asked for something that you don't have, you fluff around and try and work out what are the clients asking for. Some of our clients are quite well advanced in their sustainability approach. Part of the business that is separate to VIDA operates with plant-based food companies, so therefore incredibly sustainably led organisations within the global food industry. So it's definitely the mindset shift and cultural shift around what we can offer our consultants in terms of helping them make those better decisions as well, both at home and at work. So it's been a real transition for us.
And I think that's what we really hoped with the standard, is that we are all going to be part of someone's supply chain, yeah? And the big companies are doing it. And now the pressure's coming on us as smaller businesses and medium businesses to show what we can do. Has it helped you in a mindset, Andy? Have you learned something about yourself and your company that you think you wouldn't have done if you hadn't done this process?
Oh yeah, 100%. If you'd have asked me 12, 18 months ago, I was probably one of those individuals that probably didn't recycle enough, didn't think about these elements. I was quite ignorant to it, if I'm being honest. And it's really kind of opened my eyes. I've got 3 young children. It's very prevalent in the schoolwork that they do. And yeah, it's really transformed me. I'm sat very smug at the moment with the Tesla sat outside,
especially now with everyone queuing at the pumps.
But that shift for me has been yes, it's a very convenient thing, but actually it's a great thing. My kids absolutely, truly understand the decision we've made there. For me, from a work point of view, and it's having an effect internally as well, where the other guys in the business are looking at kind of changing, for the better. So yeah, absolutely, it's been from a cultural point of view and just making us think differently. I think James alluded to it. The start of the process was just about us offsetting carbon. And then very quickly, I realized that it wasn't our impact from our business. It was actually our solution that we made money out of that was causing an even bigger impact. So when we've created a bespoke calculator for our clients that will basically calculate their carbon impact of their recruitment process, whether that be a global recruitment, regional or UK, to then offset those projects at gold standard level isn't a significant investment for the client, but they're just not doing it. And therefore, part of their talent attraction strategy is finding these global individuals, but there's an impact of it. And we're quickly beginning to talk to our client about, one, shaping their recruitment processes so they don't have as much impact. So, doing things more online and trying to do as much to help the environment. But secondly, if they do have to travel, how do we help them, partner them and take that weight off them by offsetting it with other projects? So that's been very quickly taken up by our client base, and we're getting some really positive feedback about the fact that we're understanding our impact that's wider, that's our solution is becoming a lot more carbon neutral as well.
No, that's fantastic, and kids always are there. They're the barometer for everything. James, this is great news, isn't it? It's wonderful to see a business like many businesses. People always kind of think, oh, it's kind of big companies or manufacturing companies. You can see their carbon. But, Andy's business is like our business, an office-based business, but it's changing things one step at a time. Have you found it helpful as well for yourself, learning about where the standard and what we're doing can make real change?
Yeah, 100%. And, for me, the conversation that we have with VIDA, that we have with many other clients and prospective clients, is one that actually loads of businesses are doing stuff. They may be not procuring abroad. They maybe have already moved to a renewable tariff or some EVs. But for me, the key fundamental part to all of this is actually data. Because in doing all of those things, it's brilliant. But when you can then quantify that in data, that also then shapes policy, that then shapes the business culture that you're trying to foster as an organisation, all of those things become so much more powerful and tangible. And actually then, if you're able to speak to your kids at home, to your clients, your supply chain, etc., it becomes more of a collective movement. And the reality of where we are at today is that we need a collective movement to make a difference to fight the climate emergency that we have.
Brilliant. Gentlemen, thank you very much for that. James, as ever, brilliant stuff. And Andy, thank you so much for that. Great work at VIDA. And, it's really great to know that, the Standard is helping, any company to just look at it. That's what we want, people to look and take that first step. So thank you for your support.
No
problem. Thank you. Cheers.